Bangladesh's toxic tanneries, exporting leather goods all over the world but paying a heavy price at home. The poison and pollution, the hazards and the health risks, and the hope for change. This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Divya Gopalan. From the slums of Bangladesh to the fashion houses of the world, luxury leather goods from Dhaka are part of an industry worth $1 billion a year. Then there's the cost to workers' health and the environment, and the big plans for big improvements. That's something we're going to be discussing in depth on Inside Story over the next 25 minutes. But first, Rob Reynolds has this special investigation from the Bangladeshi capital.
Of all the difficult, dirty, and dangerous jobs Bangladeshis do to survive, these men just might have the worst. They're tannery workers who labor day in and day out, engulfed by the nauseating stench of toxic chemicals and rotting animal flesh. Mohammed Rashid's job involves processing hides in a giant wooden drum. He says he's 14 but looks older.
I am in pain a lot. There are always cuts on my hands and legs. These injuries are never ending.
He earns about $2 a day. The water they're wading in, without protective clothing, is laced with arsenic and chromium sulfate. These chemicals make the leather soft and supple. Doctors say they also cause cancer.
Lung cancer, nasopharyngeal cancer, that means cancer of the nose, nasal mucosa, and also the urinary bladder cancer.
There are more than 200 tanneries in this part of Dhaka called Hazaribagh. It's a lucrative and fast-growing industry. Leather sales were worth nearly $1 billion last year. The leather is exported to the U.S. and Europe, where it will be fashioned into costly coats, shoes, and handbags. Abdul Malik is head of the Tannery Workers Union.
This is a product that is used worldwide for luxury goods. But for these workers who are making them, neither the owners nor the government are looking after our health and safety.
A survey done by a Bangladeshi environmental group found that 90% of tannery workers die before the age of 50. For years, the Bangladeshi government has made promises, saying they'll move the tanneries out of this densely populated slum into a modern facility. But so far, all of those promises have gone unfulfilled. The government's latest plan calls for relocating the tanneries by the end of next year. Government officials did not respond to Al Jazeera's repeated requests for an interview. But it's not only the workers who are at risk from this flood of toxic chemicals. The tannery waste drains untreated straight into the streams and open sewers of this densely populated neighborhood, home to 160,000 people. A study by the Bangladeshi government and the tannery industry estimated nearly 6 million gallons of liquid waste are emitted by tanneries every day. Streets and alleys are piled high with cast-off leather trimmings, bones, and rotting animal parts. The Blacksmith Institute, a New York-based environmental watchdog group, recently named Hazaribagh one of the 5 most polluted places on Earth.
If you want to know how hell looks like, you don't really wait to go to the hell. If you come to the Hazaribagh tannery and have a look at the tannery area, that should tell you perhaps how the hell looks like.
The filth from Hazaribagh flows into the Buriganga River, Dhaka's main waterway. Scientists say the Buriganga is essentially a dead zone. A Human Rights Watch investigation last year found no attempt by authorities to crack down on polluting tanneries. It called Hazaribagh an enforcement-free zone.
This is because the government wants only to buy the argument of earning foreign export. So I would say that this is a case of total absence of governance.
Muhammad Ali Akbar has lived here for 50 years.
The government doesn't understand. If they did, we wouldn't be living in this filth.
He blames toxic waste for his daughter's death from cancer.
I tried to save her, but I couldn't do anything. It's because of this place.
No in-depth health studies have been done on the people living in Hazaribagh. Despite the filth, the danger, and the stink, Mohammed Rashid is resigned to life in the tanneries.
I have no education, nothing, so I have to do it. There's no other way.
Cheap Bangladeshi labor lowers the cost of leather goods sold in wealthy countries. But there's a price paid in human misery in a far-off place called Hazaribagh. Rob Reynolds, Al Jazeera, Dhaka.
I'd like to point out that we have asked the government ministers to be part of this show, but they have been unavailable. It is also worth noting that in 2009, the Bangladeshi High Court asked the government to relocate the tanneries to an area outside of Dhaka. Industries Minister Dilip Barua says the government is committed to an environmentally friendly tannery zone, but nothing much appears to be happening because of disagreements between the authorities and the tannery owners over who should bear the cost of the move. So now let's bring in our guests. In Dhaka, we have Mohammed Abu Tahir. He's the chairman of the Bangladesh Finished Leather Goods and Footwear Exporters Association. And joining us from Bangkok is Richard Piercehouse, a senior researcher with Human Rights Watch, focusing on environmental issues in Asia. I'd like to begin first with Mr. Mohammed Abu Tahir. Thank you very much for coming on the show. If I can refer to the report we just played out, the facts and the figures paint a terrible picture of your industry. Why aren't conditions being made any better? Weren't there any moves to improve conditions in your factories and the environmental damage that's being done?
We are working on it, and we have taken all the measures. And lastly, the measure we have taken that we are shifting the tannery from here to new tannery area. And it will take some time because central effluent treatment plant is going to start. It's a part of the government job. And we are pursuing government so that quickly they finish, we can start our production sometime in the end of the next year, and completely we can shift our tannery from Hazaribagh to new tannery location by 2015. So relocating tanneries, we are working, and we are cooperating with the government, and we are pressurizing the government so that they do more quicker than what we are doing.
Okay, I'm going to I'd like to bring up that point again with you, but let me bring in Mr. Richard Piercehouse from Human Rights Watch, who has been to some of those factories, has been in that area and spoken to people there. Firstly, before we go to the point of relocating, I would like to start with what you have seen, or what it is that has stood out for you most about what you've seen and heard in that area.
It's hard to describe just how contaminated and polluted Hazaribagh is. The stench is noticeable suburbs away. I was 3 times in Hazaribagh itself doing interviews with workers and local residents, and each time I was in the field in Hazaribagh would fall ill with some of the same symptoms that were being described by the people I was interviewing. And I was able to leave after a week or 10 days. The difficulty for those who live in Hazaribagh and who work in Hazaribagh is difficult to overstate.
Going back to Mr. Mohammed Abu Tahir, I do appreciate that, yes, there are moves to relocate these factories. But let me first go back to the conditions of what is happening in the workplace itself. You know, as Mr. Piercehouse said, there are terrible diseases and issues that have arose from that. Mainly also, there are accusations by Human Rights Watch also that people don't have proper equipment, goggles, gloves, and other things that are needed for this kind of a job. Why is that?
I think, you see, I know it's very important. We, the owner of the tannery, also working in the same condition, but we are using hand gloves and any hazardous for working condition. We are improving day by day. So what allegation is being done by HR, we know it and we are improving it. If you see all the good tanneries, the working condition is very good. Although some of the tanneries may not good as it is expected, but we are trying our best so that working condition and health hazards things we can remove it.
Richard Piercehouse, if I can get you to address those comments we just heard.
Sure. Sure, that's certainly not our findings. Our findings were done by talking to workers inside the tanneries, both smaller tanneries and larger tanneries. They would express to me extreme frustration from the factory floor. They'd be talking about the exposure to chemicals that they know is doing damage to their health, both short-term and the immediate problems with skin infections, respiratory problems, eye conditions, etc. But also long-term, because many of these chemicals are confirmed carcinogens. And they would know that it was doing damage to their health, the exposure, but they wouldn't have the means to protect themselves. So they wouldn't be given gloves or masks, goggles or aprons to wear. And they would say that for the price of those things, that could be provided by their employees, the employers, they simply weren't being provided, and so they were very upset and angry about that, because they knew they were bearing the brunt of that decision not to supply or to material or to supply it in insufficient equipment. Also, with the problem of child labour, there's sometimes a myth that child labour is only occurring in the small tanneries. It's a small fringe issue, and again, that wasn't our finding. Our finding was that children were working not in all tanneries, but in many tanneries. It was easy for me to see children who were going into tanneries to work. It was easy for me to talk to children who were working inside tanneries. One that I remember very clearly was an 11-year-old boy whose job inside this particular tannery was to carry hides that had been soaked in chemicals to another part of the facility. He would talk about how difficult it was for him to work, because when he put the hides on his head, he was carrying them on his head, the chemicals would seep out and cross across his face, and then it would cause a stinging sensation. And that child was 11 years old. I'd like to say that was an exceptional case, but I'm afraid I don't think it actually is. I think child labour is common in the tanneries, and it's also been documented by organisations earlier than mine. So we have studies from child labour in the tanneries dating back from the mid-90s, and we don't see the necessary progress on slowly phasing out children in the tanneries, and certainly stopping them from doing the most hazardous types of labour.
Mr. Tahera, I see you shaking your head as Mr. Piercehouse was talking about child labour. What is your association's stance on children working in factories?
We recognize the issue from various reports, and we are trying out our best to eliminate the child labour. And during the peak season, a lot of worker comes and goes, and maybe some child labour looks like, but if we ask age-wise, then age is workable. And maybe a few exceptions what was claimed, maybe I will not deny it, but we are trying our best. We are writing our tanneries, don't employ any child labour, and we will allow them to do it in near future, either in Hazaribagh, a new area. When it will be relocated, then the child labour will not be allowed even in that fence.
Okay, it's clear that this whatever changes that are going to be made is going to be a very, very long process, and it needs a lot of impetus from the industrialists and the leather exporters as such. Tell me, how much really is it going to cost the factories and these leather companies to, one, stop the child labor and start paying proper salaries? I mean, an adult earns, what, $50 a month, whereas a child maybe half of that, and two, give proper equipment. Is it really going to cut into the cost of the factory to do that?
I can tell you that the factories are not using child labor, as I told. Maybe few exceptional cases, what HR reports. And we are not using, and we intentionally, we do not employ the child labor. And no tannery has got the intention to use the child labor. So we don't pay them less. You know, the Hazaribagh, there is a union, and very strong union. They are good bargainer with us, and their salaries, I think we are not paying less, although it may not be international standard, but standard to Bangladesh, I think we are paying higher.
Okay, according to...
Labor, we don't like to employ any child labor. I can confirm you.
Let's pause for a moment to remind ourselves about the sheer scale of the industry. As we said, it's worth about $1 billion a year, and it employs more than 16,000 workers. Every day, the tanneries discharge 21,000 cubic meters of toxic waste into gutters that flow into Dhaka's main river. The leather produced is exported to top fashion labels in dozens of countries around the world. Italy is the largest importer of Bangladeshi leather, buying goods this year worth some $85 million. So, what do Italians know about working conditions there?
Bangladesh un po' meno, è una realtà poco conosciuta.
We don't know that much about Bangladesh, but we do know that they use child labour and that they work in dangerous health conditions.
I always check the label before I buy something. I am at a point where I don't trust imported goods.
Honestly, I never thought about it. I don't know what my jacket's made of. As long as it doesn't itch, I don't worry about it.
Okay, so you've heard those voices from Italy, and that's one of the biggest, or the biggest buyer of leather goods from Bangladesh. If I can bring in Mr. Richard Pearhouse now and ask you, isn't part of the onus, or a large part of the onus, on those international companies that buy these goods, when clearly the people in, or the industries in Bangladesh do not have impetus to change right now?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's no escaping that conclusion. I'd also say that the industry has no real intention to clean itself up. The government is not enforcing its own laws and is ignoring high court orders to relocate. And so that brings in the ultimate end destination of the leather. Much of the leather is going to Asia, but a lot of it is going to Europe. Inside Europe, it's going particularly to Italy, but also to Spain and to Germany. And our organisation has called very, very clearly for any foreign buyers of Bangladeshi leather to very, very closely scrutinise their supply chain to make sure the sorts of abuses that we documented aren't present in their supply chain. These problems are fairly easy to spot. So in Hazaribagh represents about 90% of Bangladesh's leather industry. There are some tanneries outside of Hazaribagh, but the bulk of it is in one very, very dense cluster. And just walking through Hazaribagh, it's very easy to spot those tanneries that are employing child labour. It was the case that a large number of people we talked to, including government officials, told us that not a single one of the Hazaribagh tanneries has an effluent treatment plant as required by Bangladeshi law. So the sorts of problems that we document are fairly easy to spot in terms of supply chain monitoring. And the foreign companies that are purchasing leather from Bangladesh, either as finished leather, but also as leather products, so shoes and handbags, belts and the like, have an obligation to very, very closely scrutinise those supply chains. And where they find a tannery that is in violation of Bangladeshi law to not do business with that particular tannery. That's a very, very clear recommendation from our organisation, and we'll also put pressure on this industry to clean itself up and for the Hazaribagh tanneries to relocate to Sabah.
Mr. Taher, according to the BFF-LEA, that's your association's website, it says that you have a full sense of responsibilities to uphold the impeccable image of the leather industry within the ambit of international policies. Would it help if international companies said they would stop buying leather from Bangladesh or from the companies that your association represents? Would it help for you to make a push to clean up the industry?
We are trying to clean it up. We are putting pressure to the government so that central effluent treatment plant can be completed.
But why does the government? Why
area.
can't you do it on your own? Why do you need to involve the government? Isn't it your industry's responsibility to do that? You're the ones that are profiting from it and creating the waste.
One thing that the effluent treatment plant, in case of leather industry, is very big involvement. Okay, in Hazaribagh, nobody has got the effluent treatment plant. Rather, some tannery having chrome recovery plant. That is, we have our chrome recovery plant, the most hazardous chemical. We can do it, and we are doing it. But effluent treatment plant in Hazaribagh not possible. But in Sabah, yes, the central effluent treatment plant, government is going to make it. They are contributing 20% of it. So we are putting our pressure that they should complete the treatment plant. And by this time, you see, the government also trying. They have awarded the central effluent treatment plant work. And hopefully it will be completed within the next 12 months.
Okay, Richard Peerhouse, have you seen any moves to make this treatment plant and for these tanneries to relocate to a more environmentally friendly zone?
Right. So to give your viewers an idea, the relocation plan out of Hazaribagh to an industrial area, so away from the residents and the neighbourhood, has been in existence since 2002. In 2001, there was a High Court order that inside 1 year, all polluting tanneries in Hazaribagh had to install their own means to treat their waste. That order was ignored. In 2002, there was a plan, and the relocation deadline in 2002 was 2005. In 2005, the deadline was 2007, and in 2008, the deadline was 2010. In 2013, the deadline is now 2015. It's very difficult to see how there's been a real change over that time. The real test of the genuineness about the relocation plan is whether or not any of the Hazaribagh tanneries have begun construction of their new premises in the relocation site in Sabah. Because when I was there, it was simply a green field, empty. There was an effluent treatment plant under construction, but it was empty of any construction of Hazaribagh tanneries. The plots are there. There's electricity that is running to them, but there's simply no construction there. So that's the real test about the genuineness, about whether or not relocation is going to be taking place in 2015. Mm-hmm. People I would talk to would say, that's what they say now, but really it'll be 2017 or 2019. And really, the people of Hazaribagh and the workers inside the tanneries can't afford another decade of non-compliance with environmental and labour laws.
And that's what a lot of this boils down to, is money and how much it's going to cost. So I want to bring in Mr. Mohammed Abu Taher again. Are you optimistic about the future with the tannery industry?
I am very much optimistic, and you see, if we cannot finish within next 2 years, then leather goods and leather shoe will be stopped exporting from Bangladesh.
And that's where we're going to have to leave it. I'd like to thank our guests, Mohammed Abu Taher and Richard Peerhouse. And a reminder, you can always find this program and many more at aljazeera.com. Just follow the links for shows and Inside Story. Thanks for watching. I'm Divya Gopalan. Bye for now.